So I'm here with Dr. Sang-Hyun Lee from the Sejong Institute from Korea. We've been at a meeting in Vienna on practical measures to reduce risks from fissile material. Dr. Lee has been the president of the Korea Nuclear Policy Society, as well as the Director General for Policy Planning in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So you bring a political scientist's perspective to the issues that we have been discussing. So I know probably for the Korean public and for an American public, fissile material is not a topic that most people talk about over the dinner table. And yet, Korea has a vibrant nuclear energy sector, and so does the United States. As both of us are students of international politics, we understand that these fissile materials, while they make wonderful fuel for nuclear energy, also pose some security and proliferation risks. So how does your work focus on these issues?
Well, as you mentioned, South Korea right now does not have any fissile material, does not have plutonium or HEU, highly enriched
stocks of such fissile material, right?
We don't have any stockpile. But because South Korea does not enrich uranium, and we do not reprocess spent nuclear fuel. So for the time being, it's okay. But as you see, Korean Peninsula now faces two problems with the fissile material, externally and internally. Externally, obviously, is North Korea. Despite the two historic summit meeting between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, the follow-up negotiation is quite slow and even sometimes disappointing. And we don't know where this negotiation will lead us at the end of this process. So that's one obvious concern. And internally, as you mentioned, Korea is a very active nuclear using country. Right now, we are operating 23 nuclear reactors, and problems that spent nuclear fuel is coming out continuously from those reactors.
Right.
So right now, there are more than 20,000 tons of spent nuclear fuel. And most of them are stored in the on-site storage within the nuclear power plant. But problem is that sooner or later, those storage will be full. As early as some plant will be full as early as 2023. And if those storage is full, where is the spent nuclear fuel go? That's quite a serious problem for Korea now. So, and ideally, it's best to find a deep geological repository for those spent nuclear fuel. But Korea is a small country, very crowded country, and it's not easy to find a very, very suitable place for that repository. So, if that's the situation, sooner or later, South Korea has find some way to manage those spent fuel. So there is many researches going on. For example, between Korea and US, we are working on pilot processing or nuclear fuel joint study.
Right, the US and South Korea together.
So next year, 2020, the research outcome will be announced. So it's up to, we don't know yet how the outcome conclusion will come out from those studies. Or if that's not, the outcome may not usable, perhaps Korea must rely on foreign country reprocess those spent nuclear fuel.
Just let's back up a minute. Why is reprocessing or these technical measures to manage spent fuel, why are they necessary? Because ultimately, South Korea, as well as the United States, will need a final, as you call it, a geological repository.
That's right.
For waste. So you're talking about changing the waste.
That's right. The obvious concern for Korea is that how can we reduce the physical volume of the spent nuclear fuel? So we needed to reduce the footprint of the nuclear spent fuel. So
Right.
processing or reprocessing is just one way of doing that.
But
Yeah,
it's not
yeah.
just the volume, as you
That's
know,
right.
right? It's
Yeah.
the radioactivity,
That's right.
how, as we say it colloquially, how hot it is.
So, as I mentioned, both externally and internally, sooner or later, South Korea will also face the issue of fissile material. How can we handle, better and safer way, and how can we also use nuclear energy in a more transparent and in a more transparent way.
Right.
So, one problem is that current Korean government declared that it will phase out from nuclear energy in the longer term, but still the final policy for those spent nuclear fuel is not decided yet. There are still a lot of discussions going on inside Korea among nuclear experts and policymakers, but still we don't have any conclusion about the status of those nuclear fuel in the longer term. So unless South Korean government come up with some acceptable solution for those fuel, everybody is in trouble.
Right, so even though South Korea might give up nuclear energy, and it's not at all certain that will happen, you still need to take care of the waste that's
Yes,
been
that's right.
produced.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether or not South Korea will continue using nuclear energy, what should we do with the already piled up spent nuclear fuel? I think that's the big challenge for the coming years. And of course, everything is interconnected. North Korean nuclear threat and also nuclear latency of Japan, for example. So Korean people are watching every stakeholders with a fissile nuclear.
Right,
Yeah.
and for our audience, by nuclear latency, you mean the ability of a country to take these civilian capabilities like uranium enrichment
That's
and
right,
spent
yeah.
fuel reprocessing.
In the worst case,
and
those
use it for military.
Yeah, in the worst case, those latency can be converted to military use. We don't expect such a scenario yet.
Right.
But it also depends on how bargaining, negotiation with the North Korean denuclearization proceeds, and also general security situation in Northeast Asia.
What can South Korea do to improve its transparency about its nuclear energy program, both with its domestic constituents, the public, who sometimes worry, you could say, needlessly about certain risks, but also your neighbors, so not just Japan and China, but also North Korea. They must be thinking, even if they are thinking about a future where they might not have nuclear weapons, you're their neighbor with these tremendous resources.
That's right. So in the past, international community have watched what South Korea has been doing with the nuclear energy. For example, there was some minor breach of the international norms, like without reporting to IAEA, nuclear scientists experimented with a very small amount of enrichment.
Back almost 20 years ago,
That's
I think, right? Yeah.
And also during the 1970s, when U.S. forces in Korea withdrew, there was a discussion about withdrawal from Korean Peninsula because of the security threat. Former President Park Chung-hee he considered developing nuclear weapon on Korea.
Back in the 1970s.
That's right.
Yeah.
But because of those past history, perhaps there is some concern from international community that South Korea, under severe threat from North Korea, may intend to develop nuclear weapon. So I think that's the part of the transparency problem that Korea must overcome. So I think we need some good declarated policy that South Korea will not divert those nuclear material into military use, but at the same time, we try to maintain high standard of transparency in using nuclear energy. I think that should be some kind of a good policy statement must announced by Korean government in the near future. So, of course, it's just a declaration. So it may not actually help some doubt about it from international community. But at the same time, through those statements, often, repeatedly, that South Korea should commit itself to transparent use of nuclear energy, and also will not rely on dangerous weapon. We will not pursue that line. So I think that's the kind of policy we can think of to enhance South Korea's transparency in nuclear energy.
Just to come back to your suggestion that Korea make a declaration about its nuclear program, what would that entail? If you could write it, what would that look like?
Well, first of all, we need some principle. Okay, what does nuclear energy mean for Korea? Korea is the energy deficient country, as you see. We don't have any oil produced on territory. So we have no choice. Even though current government will try to phase out, obviously phase out may be a wrong term. It try to reduce the reliance on nuclear energy in the longer term and increase the proportion of the reusable energy. So because of that, whether people like it or not, South Korea will continue to rely on nuclear energy for its electricity production. So because of that, we need more transparent and more reliable and safer guideline to govern those nuclear market in Korea. So I think that's the, of course, it will take time. Right now, nuclear governance in Korea may be separated, distracted from many government agencies. And I would recommend that Korean government may streamline those governance mechanisms, meaning that there should be some nice control tower to oversight the whole governance structure in Korea about nuclear energy. South Korea, in case I'm a little bit conservative and security concerned scholar, but I oppose to make a nuclear weapon on South Korea. Rather, instead, I don't want a nuclear weapon on Korean peninsula. So we will continue to persuade North Korea to give up their nuclear weapon. But at the same time, South Korea should enhance its transparency and confidence about nuclear energy with such a declaratory policy or higher standard for safety and security and so on.
Do you think we're not close to an agreement with North Korea, but you could imagine that if we got closer to an agreement that disarmed North Korea of its nuclear weapons, that North Korea might ask to keep some of its civilian nuclear energy facilities, like its reactor at Yongbyon or its uranium enrichment plants. Would that be totally crazy?
Perhaps North Korea may demand that because they also have some energy security concern. But once North Korea decided to denuclearize and dismantle their facilities, for the initial stage, their North Korean nuclear facilities should be under international control, not North Korean hands.
Under international control or international safeguards?
Maybe both. So international coalition team may handle those North Korean facilities, so that we can have some acceptable confidence about the transparency in North Korea. So we should pass through some transition period.
Yeah, which would be different from what we have in Iran right now, where Iran controls its facilities that make fissile material. They're still under safeguards, but we can see that they continue to try to increase enrichment levels, things like that. So I agree that your solution would be.
I would say Iran deal was possible at least because there was some confidence between stakeholders. In North Korean case, we don't have that.
Right.
So because that at the initial stage of the denuclearization, all North Korean facilities should be under international control or international safeguard.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you so much. It's
Thank
been
you.
nice
My
chatting with
pleasure.
you.